think, prepared the PowerPoint for her.
Oh, I have no idea.
All right, so, should I go ahead and take this out? I guess I'll take it out and then he won't show up.
What's that?
The resolution thing?
That's in that huge box? Why is it in such a big box?
It's framed.
Oh, it's big?
Yeah, the resolution.
Okay.
Remember, we did a
Yeah.
resolution and an award?
Yes. Yeah, that's a nice thing. We don't have that listed on the agenda though, right?
Yes, we do.
Where is it?
Recognition of former chairman.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the agenda. It's after the introduction to Catherine Starkey, then recognition.
Alright, live stream is all set. Posted it on Facebook, so everybody knows the link to go to.
And that's free, right?
Yeah, there's a $5 charge. No, I'm kidding. I meant for people that want to watch.
What? What do you mean there's a $5 charge for people?
Yeah, you go to the YouTube page and then
Yeah.
send your credit card info.
That's not true, is it?
All proceeds go to the TBARTA
Oh, God.
Regional Transit
Yeah,
Fund.
right. Fund, yeah. Rescue fund.
The TBARTA.
Could everyone take their seats, please? To call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. This is the TBARTA board meeting for February 23rd, 2018. Mayor, could you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks. Sue, could you call the roll, please?
Jim Holton,
Present.
Melanie Griffin,
Present.
Cliff Manuel. Mr. Manuel is unable to be with us today. He sends his regrets. Mike Millett,
Present.
Commissioner Wayne Dukes. Commissioner Dukes is unable to be with us. He sends his regrets. Commissioner Pat Kemp,
Here.
Commissioner Betsy Benak. Commissioner Benak is unable to be with us. She sends her regrets. Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Present.
Commissioner Karen Seal.
Here.
Mayor Rick Kreisman. Mayor Bob Buckhorn.
Here.
Kathleen Shanahan.
Here.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Secretary David Gwynn.
Here.
Secretary L.K. Nandam.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We have a new member to introduce today, Catherine Starkey. Welcome to the board.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to working with you. Have a few comments for us, please.
Do I?
Yes.
Well, I look forward to serving on this board. It's my first time on TBARTA, and being an active member and pushing for regional solutions to our problems. Thank you.
Thank you. We all share that desire. Susan, can you give the public announcement, please, for public comment?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to me. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended for up to 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And again, anyone wishing to give public comment, please fill out one of these cards and give it to Sue or another staff member. The chair will recognize first Anthony Palmieri.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Charamanti. Several months ago, I decided not to seek reappointment to the TBARTA CAC. It was a difficult decision for me to make after being on the CAC for the past 8 years. My decision was based on the fact that the new TBARTA is required to plan, develop, and implement a transit system for the Tampa Bay region. That project may take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to complete. I felt that the CAC member must get involved in this project and should commit themselves to remain on the CAC from the beginning to the end. Because of my age, I was not able to commit myself for such a long period of time, and I felt that it's best at this time to step down. That would probably be best for TBARTA and the CAC to have someone else appointed in my place that could stay with this project from the beginning to the end. Needless to say, I enjoy very much serving on the CAC. I met many people. I made many friends. It was a kind of a unique experience that I will never forget. I want to thank this board and previous board for allowing me to serve for as long as I did. I also want to express my appreciation to Mr. Charamanti and his staff for their assistance during the years that I served on the CAC. I guess that's about it, Mr. Chairman. I wish each of you good luck, and TBARTA good luck for the future, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you so much for your service to this community and this state. We really, really sincerely appreciate it and wish you could stay on, but understand. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chair next recognizes Karen Mullins.
Good morning. I currently serve on the CAC, and I want to express my disappointment in what we're accomplishing. We're accomplishing nothing. Our CAC has not had a quorum in over a year. So basically, we're consenting. Our voices as citizens are not being heard. We're not getting anywhere, and the reports that are coming to the TBARTA CAC have nothing to do with transportation, with transit. We're hearing reports from the DOT when we hear multimodal stations, but we don't hear tracks. We don't hear rubber on the roads. We don't hear the actual functioning of transit. As you know, I come from Pinellas County. I am on the MPO CAC. This board was created to galvanize, to champion, to create, to get out of ourselves and look past the present situation and create a vision of transportation for our future. Not for today, not for tomorrow, for 25 years out. I am asking this board to not only change the dynamic, change the vision, see us through the next 30 years, and to tell our children that there will be transit, that we can bring in economic development, that companies are skipping our area because we do not have an adequate transit system. Pinellas County is built out. We have no more room for roads. You can ask several members on this council who have worked tirelessly to make transportation work, and I thank them for it. My other concern is, on this board, there is nobody here who represents transportation disadvantage. Our voices are not being heard. We need to include somebody to sit on this board, to sit on the CAC with an active voice. The MPOs, the representatives, I go to almost every TBARTA CAC meeting. I don't have a voice. I don't have a vote. So I'm asking this board to galvanize, to come together. This is bigger than tracks. This is bigger than rubber on the roads. This is bigger than the arguments. It is easy to say no so that you get reelected. It is not easy to say yes and champion our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes Lena Young-Green.
Good morning. Thank you for an opportunity to come before you once again. Several years ago, when the TBX was first rolled out, we visited with this board to talk about our issues in Hillsborough County, in Tampa Heights, in my neighborhood. At that time, you were advised by your executive director that your job was not to look down in the weeds. Your job was to be more holistic. Well, my response at that time was, your weeds was my front yard, my family, my neighborhood, my air, my water, and my soil. We later brought a group of our children before you, and they did such an eloquent job of talking with you and explaining the impact that decisions made by this body have directly on us as children in the community, as their family, and as residents of our neighborhood. I'm here back today again to talk about pretty much the same thing, but talk about it from a broader perspective. Hillsborough County is one of the largest counties in this area. You as a body must look at us from the perspective of the impact of Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa to your decisions. We need transit, we need transportation, We need a way for my children who are millennials and my grandchildren who want to get around today without roads. They want effective transportation. They don't want to own cars. Many of them don't. Please look at what your decisions are. Identify ways of not building more roads out. Commissioner Pat Frank talks about using the CSX. Those are things that we support. We know that roads additional interstate roads do not generate economic impact as much as transportation and as transit and other means of getting around. We really support more walkable, bikeable communities, cleaner air, and means of not having more cars on the road. Please look at your decisions and your direction from that perspective. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Chair next recognizes Rick Fernandez.
Good morning. Rick Fernandez, 2906 North Elmore Avenue, Tampa 33602. That's a habit. I'm sorry, I can't be broken from it. I'm the president of the Tampa Heights Civic Association and also serve on the MPO CAC here in Hillsborough County. As fortunes would have, I'm here to discuss the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan on your agenda. As fortunes would have it, the Civic Association had a meeting last night, one of the most well-attended of the year, and we had a representative from Jacobs there to present the RTFP to our community, so I'm in the unique position of being able to share with you some of the feedback that we got from that association meeting just as recently as last night. Given the time limitations, I can only offer some general comments, and let me back up for a second. I'm not familiar with all of you. Maybe all of you don't know where Tampa Heights is. If Interstate 275 is our regional spine, Tampa Heights falls basically around T6, T7 in the thoracic spine area. We are quite literally in the middle of all of this mess, all right? So we are among the most impacted, certainly, and among the most vulnerable in all of these discussions that we're having regarding transportation and transit. First, in terms of general community feeling, I think we recognize that the RTFP as presented so far is a first step. We feel that there is a lot of room for improvement. As a community, we would like to see an upgrade to gold standard BRT, which this clearly is not, and or turn attention to the opportunities that are presented by CSX right-of-way, either the 9-mile version from USF downtown or the longer version from South Tampa up through USF. Those opportunities, I think, are way too good to simply be ignored at this stage. More specifically, and again, given time limitations, I want to focus on one area in particular which, frankly, if not addressed, in my humble opinion, amounts to political malpractice. And that's the question of transit-oriented development and return on investment. I live about a block from the intersection of Florabraska and 275. That's a spot where, under the current plan, there would presumably be a station placed for the BRT that is proposed. If I thought that there would be transit-oriented development associated with that, I would be jumping up and down excited because, according to what I read at least, within the walkshed of about a quarter mile from any of these fixed transit stations, we should expect transit-oriented development. New businesses, new residents, new tax base, increased property values. Not for a moment do I believe that a fixed station at that intersection is going to have any of that effect in the Tampa Heights area. And we do not have an analysis, an economic impact analysis to determine what, if any, impact such a station would have. My proposition to you is that there is a question of price and there's a question of cost. What's being presented now seems to be overly focused on the question of cost, or price, I'm sorry, as in, let's do this on the cheap. But what we're forgetting is that there is a cost to placing these stations in the wrong place, lost tax base, et cetera. And unless we understand the difference between a station in Tampa Heights at Florabraska and the interstate and somewhere else, perhaps on the CSX line, what that difference is in price and cost, we're missing the point of this. This plan could be, in fact, much more expensive to us than anything else that's being considered. And I hope you understand that and you'll bring that forward and request that type of economic analysis and multiply that gain or loss by each of the stations along the route, because there are multiple stations. Finally, again, I don't know where I am on time here, but
Take as much as you need. Appreciate your comments.
Well, I appreciate that. The dedicated lane question. This plan does not have dedicated lanes throughout the entire 40-mile corridor. I could talk about each individual section separately, but I want to focus specifically on that section on the Howard Franklin Bridge, because frankly it's problematic to me on more than one level. At that point, across that span, we're talking about mixing BRT vehicles, whatever we're going to call them, with express lane traffic, all right? The presumption is that there are going to be express toll lanes, managed toll lanes across the bridge at that point. I don't know where that assumption and presumption come from. TBX is supposedly shelved. I can't find a reference to TBX in the press now without the word defunct before it. We are in Tampa Bay Next now, which is supposed to be a process to determine where we are going to be going forward. There has been absolutely no determination that we're going to have express lanes across the Howard Franklin Bridge, although I believe FDOT expects that that's going to be the case. So until that determination is made, the idea of placing these buses on an express lane that may or may not be tolled is folly. That is a flaw in the ointment, and we can't be relying on it. We can shoot for the stars and hit the moon. In this case, I don't think we've hit the stars or the moon. If anything, we've hit a low-flying albatross. We can do a whole lot better, and I think Tampa deserves a whole lot better. So I appreciate your thoughts, you're listening to me, and I look forward to future comments from my friends and neighbors behind me. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. The chair now recognizes Michelle Cookson.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak before you. I apologize, I'm going to have to glance on my phone for my notes. I definitely wanted to come today to speak to you because you will be, you have a presentation on your agenda regarding the Regional Transit Feasibility Program. And what we've seen so far is very troubling for me in a couple of areas. The first of all, basically, is the public was required and, not required, excuse me, was encouraged to come out to meetings that led up to where we are today, where they weighed in with what they cared about, what they valued, and they ranked a different choice ahead of what we're being told is, hey, this is the best we could do. Now we all need to rally behind it. It just feels like, yet again, from the very beginning, this process represented something. You know, I went to every charrette that FDOT held, and very actively participated in that and encouraged others to do so. And at that time, we were told, hey, you know, we hear you, we hear you. Hillsborough has got to weigh in on what their choice for transit is. Oh, we hear you, you want transit. Here's $1 million for this new study. And it sure seems like when you examine the RFP and you look at where we're at today, that that was baked in to arrive at a predetermined conclusion. The problem is this is not BRT. It might be BERT, but it's not BRT. So there needs to be honesty and forthright openness with the public who are going to be asked to pay for this and ultimately to support it. We could do a lot better than that. You know, this is, I'm sorry, I can't help feeling that this was designed to arrive at what they wanted to do all along, and that is a highway project. It was not about transit. We have a great opportunity, and the point of all that, and the reason why I'm just not sold on this BRT, is because it represents such a poor choice when we have a greater opportunity right there available for us in the CSX in a 20-mile long stretch that will connect what we have in our densest areas already. Greater opportunity, greater ROI. We can't only be focused on, we're going to check this box because we're chasing this chunk of federal money. We also have some other obligations that are in there. My understanding is this board is supposed to end up implementing that. I really hope you'll ask those questions. One of the other things I wanted to mention is, we keep being told, that CSX isn't an option for us because of those cost factors. But meanwhile, in Orlando, FDOT purchased the right of way and paid for 7 years of operating expenses for Sunrail. They ought to do the same for the Tampa Bay region. And it's been addressed before, but transit-oriented development is so critical, and the manner in which we do it is critical, and it makes a difference in how we move forward. Being regional is absolutely important, but we keep being told it's about this catalyst, it's about this catalyst. We have a great catalyst that we know can be successful and can be built upon that will serve the region in the CSX opportunity. So, I'm all about that idea, but if we don't arrive collectively as a region with a future that's based on walkable, transit-oriented spaces, we will fulfill this self-fulfilling prophecy of, oh my God, we're getting left behind. When we make these poor choices, that's where we end up. We'll be left behind, especially for the people who value that, who are going to invest in that, and who are going to be drawn to this area for those different kinds of choices, with an emphasis on transit. And finally, I wanted to also say, I understand this is a regional body, but time and time again, Hillsborough County is being asked to be the sacrificial lamb. At the same time, when you look at this BRT line and how long it is, we're going to pick up the greatest amount of cost, impact, and ongoing requirement to support it. I just really believe this is the moment, and I know I sense it that you all understand the importance of this. This is the moment where we can turn and make a choice that's based on the future, that can provide buy-in. My very last thought, thank you for your time, is, if this is a catalyst, it's important to think of this in a broader spectrum of, we would very much like, and the public has been very engaged, and when I say we, I speak for my organization, Sunshine Citizens, we would very much like to be that catalyst. That's a different direction this can go in. And I think if you look around and understand politically what's happening, people have had it. They've had it with this top-down approach. They've had it with putting their energy into things and seeming to end up feeling like no one's taking my input and they're not involving me. But then they're asked to go ahead and say, I'll commit to the investment and the funding. So remember that a catalyst could be a wave of public support when their thoughts, input, and beliefs are taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. The chair will now recognize Tom Nacera.
Good morning. First of all, I'm impressed by the passion of all the speakers that have appeared before you this morning. And I also am impressed with a common thread that many of them have expressed with regard to the CSX line and how important that can be to the future of transit. And I want everyone to realize that we've been looking at that St. Pete Tampa Aerial Transit LLC, which I set up last year. We've been looking at that as well as one of the backbone spines for a regional transit system that will not involve having to buy the tracks or to really disrupt the current service on the tracks, but merely obtain a right-of-way, an aerial right-of-way alongside those tracks to connect Tampa and downtown St. Petersburg with stations in all the cities that are included in that area. We've talked to Bob O'Malley about that, and in order to be able to commence a deal with CSX, we need to first be able to get our pilot project established between Clearwater and Clearwater Beach. We're working on that, and that's going to involve a bridge study and some other things to show FDOT that the system that we envision will operate safely and do no harm to FDOT's bridges. The company that we entered into an agreement with last April, Skytran, has completed another round of funding. They're doing more rounds, and more importantly than they're raising money is that they've entered into an agreement with the Boeing Corporation to design their pods. Boeing's involvement, I believe, bodes well. They're also in negotiations at Kennedy Space Center to now locate their world headquarters there, along with their test track, which will actually come inside their world headquarters. We're optimistic about the future of the Tampa Bay area because of everything that's happened in the past. what a blessing it is that we don't have light rail already. We don't have obligations to any old technologies where we can go forward with the 21st century technology. And that's been the focus of what I've been working on with my team over in Clearwater. And I want to reiterate now my request to be able to come before your board and make a detailed presentation of our plans to solve not only our traffic congestion problem, but to provide a transit system that this area will be proud of for the next, I don't think 25 years. I think we're thinking more like 30 years actually with this system. We don't know what the technologies will be that will come along in the future, but for now, this is the best one that I've been able to find. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Bob Hinion.
Good morning. My name is Bob Henyon. I'm a member of the TBARTA CAC and also Forward Pinellas CAC and previously the JCAC of West Central Florida MPO. What I see and the people on the TBARTA and on the Forward Pinellas board see is this is a critical issue. Forward Pinellas CAC voted on our priorities last year, about June. And what we found to be most important was regional transit. Although we're involved mostly with highways, regional transit we saw as the main deficiency that this area has to deal with. I'm glad to be on the TBARTA CAC, and I'm glad that we're making the change over to transit because we need that, and we need it being regional. We can't risk the danger of looking for it being in my backyard. We have to celebrate it being one of ours backyard. We had our first TBARTA CAC meeting on Valentine's Day, first since October of last year. We have not had a quorum in over a year. We cannot vote. We come to a consensus and we make motions on that. Being on a CAC is a very important thing. It gives us as citizens an opportunity to have input and to be a part of what's going on here. But it also requires us to have a responsibility to follow these things and to show up. I'm looking forward to two things. I'm looking forward to TBARTA being able to come up with some plans and challenge the issues of transit and also receive some funding. And I'd also like to see our CAC reach having a quorum so we can become functional again. Thank Anthony for his service as chairman. We come forward, we had 5 members at our last meeting, only 2 of whom had votes, so we didn't qualify as a quorum, and this is really important. We feel we should be an important part of the process. We bother showing up, and we look forward to where we're going now, hoping that something happens after many years. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, and thank you for your service, and thanks most importantly for everyone showing up. That's the critical thing in a democratic process, is to show up, register your opinion, and vote when necessary. So thank you, sir, for that. The chair will now recognize Chris Vila.
Good morning. My name is Chris Ravella. I actually live right next to the downtown interchange, I-4, I-275, heart of Ybor City. I also serve and volunteer for the city for the BLC. I do a lot of community awareness and projects in my neighborhood because I love my neighborhood. Now I'm going to be talking about 3 fundamental points here. One's going to be talking about funding. The other one's going to be talking about environmental impacts and value. And then lastly is how the sport's being run. One of my biggest issues with the transit study is we're not necessarily including a really broad spectrum of funding. We're approaching this funding like in the 1970s. In the 1970s, MPOs were founded. They basically took public comments and seeked out federal money and also some state matching. But we know that right now, the gas tax is not going up from a federal standpoint, even though we adjust that statewide. We know that there's no money coming forward. When I go over to Germany Library, for example, I like to look back to see what other transit advocates have done. And I found an article from 1984 that talked about having high-speed rail here, 1984. And here we are in 2018. And we barely we have a streetcar that goes like for a 2-mile span, and that's it. And it's kind of frustrating, especially being a resident of Ybor and having like basically the most walkable like urban village in front of me. So what I would urge this board to do is we're going to have a local match no matter what. But I want to let you guys know of a $3.7 trillion bond market. It's called Climate and Green Bonds. And I think this could be excellent approach to funding like a very robust like city and also regional transit system. Other cities that have taken advantage of this is San Francisco, Portland, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Connecticut, Cleveland, Indiana, San Francisco, and also New York City. St. Paul, Minneapolis, I just saw today also took advantage of these bonds. And so the way how these bonds work, they go into specific types of infrastructure that reduces the amount of air quality and the amount of environmental impact that we would have in the urban area. So the track line of these bonds are kind of low risk because you know what you're getting. You know what value you're going to get back. And I think this would be an approach to include with the study. And we just can't be talking about 1970s funding anymore. And also I've been hearing a lot of buzz from like having autonomous vehicle technology. But the thing is that even the federal like government right now, they're in a very early stage. They're trying to get proposals of how to actually have transit and autonomous vehicles. And so my whole issue right now is like, we already have like rail that works really well. We already have like smart technology that works well. Let's just use that today. We don't have to wait 5 or 10 years, because it was kind of a sad story to hear that someone was leaving, you know, the CAC board because there wasn't enough time. He didn't have enough time to see the fruition of transit. So I think we can get there really quickly with this funding. I also think we can get there quickly with the technology that we have today that is scalable, and we can include like new emerging technologies with that. Now, I'm gonna zoom out here because I think this whole study is convoluting the issue. That is TBX. We know that from our own state constitution, the state owes us a high-speed rail system. You can look that up. It's right there. It's plain as day. It's been there for, I think, probably well over a decade. We need that like now, and you guys need to make that happen. And the other thing too, as Hillsborough County residents, we're like the highest like taxpayers like regionally, especially in the city of Tampa. We get taxed pretty heavily, and I think probably the public trust issue right now at this point is that we're not seeing any value of having these regional boards and getting that return back. And we are like paying through the nose. And as you know, the mayor's over here, but we have a lot of other needs, infrastructure needs in the city. And really we need to be focusing on that as well. We are booming. We have over $11 billion in permitting. And probably excess more. I know in Ybor we have over 60 million. We have to figure out a way how to connect these people to different neighborhoods. We have to be a competitive city, but you also have to treat the people who live here right. And you have to take that step today. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this is not BRT. This is called Bus Express Rapid Transit. You can look at what's happening like in Miami. This system is being implemented there. It was actually implemented in the Katy Freeway, but it completely like dissolved and failed. So we just can't go onto this approach anymore. I think CSX, and I heard like a lot of people behind me said that that has a tremendous amount of value. In fact, CSX would cost roughly between 18 million to 20 million per mile. When we broke down and like calculated TBX or having these express lanes, which we don't know if it's determined or not, as Rick Fernandez has said, we're looking anywhere from 120 to 150 million per mile. So as a taxpayer, I mean, the choice is simple. It's like, why don't we go with something that would actually reduce environmental impacts on a big, citywide scale, and then we get more value because we can move people off the interstate, and that way you can actually, have a more efficient interstate system. You don't have to widen it. Heck, if you want to have dedicated freight, you can do that to boost port operations because we know that's more state money that comes in, and hopefully that state money can be reappropriated to like more transit initiatives and infrastructure needs that we have in our state of Florida. And then the other thing is the way how this board is structured, and I wrote 2 legislation while you guys were getting rebranded for transit. I think there's too many state people appointed on this board. I would like to see, especially for the study, District 7 and District 1 FDOT not be in those chairs. I think they need to approach the podium like any other transportation board. In fact, I think those chairs should be a citizen appointed chair, whether it's from like one Hillsborough County and another county. We need to have that civic voice in this. And right now, we can't because we have too many state appointees on this board. I don't think nobody really understands. My neighborhood has been blocked off like 9 different times, like by the state. Basically, we have like dead ends, and we're wedged up against a roadway system, and we have the highest cancer risk, literally the highest cancer risk in the city of Tampa, in Hillsborough County. The maps are online, or like the MPO has all this data. And so I can't fundamentally think like, how in the world can a BRT light, this BERT system, can alleviate like the toxic particles that I breathe, and also the black and brown minority communities, because basically that's what we are. We're all like lassoed into these ropes, and we've been divided by roads. So what I like to see is a nice transit system that connects these neighborhoods and doesn't necessarily rely on these roads that unfortunately have divided and continue to divide and impact my own health as well as the rest of my community. We're talking about 115,000 people of ethnic or racial and ethnic backgrounds that this whole area is like looking at. So it's a big thing. It's not like just a couple people. So please just take my recommendations. We can't operate this anymore like in this manner. We have to like integrate well with like the city's vision plan, for example. There's some really great stuff over there, and we have to look at other cities and see what they're doing. We have to look at the value of CSX, and we just have to design for the people here, but also be competitive as well. So with that said, good luck, and you're probably going to be seeing me around a lot more often.
Thank you, and we hope so. Thanks for those comments. Chair recognizes now Dania Lazarus.
Mr. Chairman, this is my first meeting, but is it possible that we can limit the comments to 3 minutes so we can get on with the business?
We typically can. I think we've got one more after that. I've given a lot of...
That was 7.5 minutes.
Okay, I understand. The chair has some discretion in that, and I think given the passion in this community, it's important to hear these folks, and we've got 2 more left, so we'll try to conclude. Thanks.
Thank you.
Please
Thank you,
proceed.
sir. Hi, my name is Dana Lazarus. I am a student at USF in the master's program for urban and regional planning. So that's where I'm coming from today. I'm also a 5th generation native of Tampa. My great-great-great-great-grandfather moved to Ybor from Sicily. So I really care about this community, and I do plan to be here long term. I plan to work here after USF. This is where I want to work in planning and specifically transportation planning. So I have just a few brief comments. I feel that we need to invest in something very long term, in something that benefits a lot of our population. And that, I believe, should be rail. And I also understand that there are funding constraints, and I know that the MPO and other boards are working hard to find out how we can fund things like this. I also feel that if we can commit as a region, as a county, and this isn't, I mean, obviously you represent a different population more broadly, but in terms of committing to something very expensive, the Board of County Commission has committed to a giant baseball stadium for $800 million that only benefits a very small part of the population. And I just think that we need to commit to rail, because rail is something that literally everybody that I know wants and is interested in. Transit affects everybody in this city. Whereas with like baseball stadiums, the multiplier effects that come from baseball stadiums are not super measurable. And also, as a student at USF's amazing MERP program, every single class I've taken so far, from community development, land use planning, metropolitan economics, even planning history and theory, touts the importance of rail to great cities. Some technical stuff, rail, I believe as a very accessible form of transit, is at the intersection of a bunch of different justices, like how in Portland they use electric rail. It is at the intersection of climate justice. It is at the intersection of environmental justice, social, economic, class, and racial justice. And in addition, fixed guideways, I'm sure you've heard this a bunch already, but fixed guideways encourage development because they are an investment, they're a long-term investment. And that, as somebody who wants to live and work here for my whole life, and I want to have a family here, that is so important to me. I don't want to have buses that can be moved around, because then we'll just end up where we are today again in the future. And finally, so I'm 28 years old, I'm a millennial. Everybody talks about how, you know, the elusive and popular millennials, like you want us to be in your city. The city is for us. Honestly, I mean, I want you to be able to live here until, you know, forever as well, and retire here and be happy here as well. But growing up and looking for a career here, I can tell you millennials want light rail, they want rail options. I want rail, and like I said, everybody I know wants rail. And then, so my last comment is just echoing Chris Vela, that I do think that there should be more citizen representation in these processes, and on boards like this, especially citizen representation that represents those most affected by the decisions that are being made. And so that's my comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Finally, the chair recognizes Sydney Eastman.
Good morning. My name is Sydney Eastman. I'm not extremely educated about this issue, but I do ride the bus. I'm a primary transit rider. I don't own a car, and I haven't for 5 years. I can say I'm 27 years old. I travel a lot. I've been all around the world. The first thing I look for when I go to travel to a city is not hotel costs, it's transit. Good public transit is the very first thing I look for, because it tells me that I'm going to be able to get around a city very well. I'm going to be able to interact with the people in it. I'm going to be able to access more of the city. Unfortunately, I feel like any time the topic of transit comes up in this city or in this county, the actual ridership are never considered. The access, even to talk about this, I didn't know about this meeting. It was my friend who's going to college for city planning who told me about this. I wouldn't have even known about this had she not invited me. So, you know, bottom line, I want to see rail in the city. I think we can see very clearly. It'll be an immediate impact on pollution, which Tampa is like number 3 in the state for. And obviously, it's our Black and brown and poor communities who are suffering most from that air pollution. Light rail would be a cheaper and more effective solution than more buses, more highways, more toll lanes, which is all I usually see you guys considering. So I'd like to see just the ridership considered, you know, as best you can. If you guys could do like a little bit more outreach into the community, that'd be great. Let us know when you're having meetings. And yeah, consider rail. It's cheaper too. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Chair recognizes Commissioner Long.
For a point of order, please. I think it's really important that this board stay very focused on our mission as specified in the Florida statute that created us, because a lot of the conversation I've heard today from the citizens is referencing specific projects pertinent to Hillsborough County only. And we are a regional agency. Our mission is to focus on those things that are regional. And the appropriate place for these comments, it seems to me, and I'm asking for a correction if I'm wrong, need to be referred to HART, which is the transit agency for Hillsborough, or the MPO here in Hillsborough County. That's how we operate in Pinellas, and I don't think that statutorily we can encroach on local transit agencies. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Commissioner Long, thanks for those comments, and I think jurisdictionally you're probably correct. This is, however, public comment, and some of these projects could be considered catalytic
I
projects.
would like to have a point of order here, too. If there's going to be a discussion like this, there's no reason that the CSX is not a regional project. It can be a regional project. It's just that we had a very contrived study that did 9 miles when we had a study from 2012 that did 12 miles of this region. It runs throughout the region as it does in Orlando, as it does in Miami. There is no reason that this is not under consideration as a regional project, except that we had a very contrived false study. We haven't had any presentation. And what you're doing is defining exactly what you want to be what the region should have. This is not, if this is a regional discussion, let's really have a regional discussion about what options we have regionally. And for you to curtail that and say that we can only discuss this roadway, that is, that is not our mission, I do not think. And I think, in fact, it is contrary to our mission here.
Well, the chair is going to allow a lot of leeway in public comment because we value public comment, and I think generally anything can be interpreted as a catalytic project for purposes within this area. But jurisdictionally, we will get into that as we deliberate and move forward on voting matters, and we have to consider those considerations because we are a creature of the Florida legislature, and law, and we have to follow the law ultimately, and that's what we'll do. But I encourage public comment on any discussion about Tampa Bay because I think it's very, very relevant.
May I also say that there's no reason why, if Pinellas County prefers what I think is actually a bad project of the express bus system on top of the expressway, which they haven't even invested in to this day. But if they prefer that, that would be something that they could do to move people through their region. Hillsborough County has definitely the opportunity to move people through our region in a way that we consider best. We're going to be funding it. It's going to be our choice to make. So if connecting up to that is different than what this catalyst plan is, that is going to be something that we'll be doing. Moving forward, I don't think we can ignore. I mean, I represent all of Hillsborough County. I'm not going to ignore the best project that we can do to move people through Hillsborough County and connect up with the region at the airport. I would really like to see a express bus from St. Petersburg to Gateway to the airport, which hasn't been done, but that would be a great project.
All under consideration, and we appreciate it. We do have to move on with the agenda, and these items will be gotten into as we forward this process along.
Thank you.
But thank you both for those comments. Any other public comment? All right, no other cards being received. I'll close public comment. The next order of business is approval of the prior minutes. Are there any corrections?
Approval. Second.
All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Minutes approved. We'll now turn to committee reports. Michael Case on the CAC.
Good morning, board members. Michael Case,
Morning.
TBARTA staff. The Citizens Advisory Committee held its bi-monthly meeting this past February 14th at the TBARTA office. I served as chair of that meeting. The former chair, whom you heard from this morning, Anthony Palmieri, the former Hernando County appointee, resigned in August of last year. For this meeting, we did not have a quorum. There were no public comments, and there were no action items for this meeting in particular. Members did hear and had discussion about several items, which are also on the agenda this morning. Ones that weren't, the TBARTA MPO-CCC regional and future regional priority projects, which you approved at last month's meeting, the regional transit feasibility plan update, and the HART Metro Rapid BRT study, which you'll hear this morning. They had some general discussion about some of the local corridors along the regional project, as well as how some of the costs that are included in the plan were calculated. They were also briefed on the TBARTA MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee Regional Public Participation Program, which you heard and adopted at the January board meeting. They also were briefed on the TBARTA revised purpose, vision, goals, principles, and action plan that came out of the December meeting and were adopted at the January meeting. The last item that was discussed was the CAC membership. All of them being aware that you are in the process of making appointments or reappointments to who is going to serve on that committee. The next meeting is on April 18th, and we are working on putting that agenda together this month. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Michael?
I have a question. What is the challenge with getting a quorum? I mean, where is the delay?
That's a good question. Since I've been on TBARTA staff, we have not had a quorum. We've done, I think, quite a bit to encourage their participation in person. But the biggest challenge is that a lot of the members, I think, may not be as mobile or able to attend physically at the meetings, which is required to get a quorum. So we have a lot of participation by phone, but as you heard this morning, only 2 of the voting members were able to attend at this past meeting.
It just seems there should be something that we should do. If we're truly about the integrity of citizens' participation in the process, we should make this work. And you either get enough appointments or get, go back to the legislature and say, if you voice vote or you voice participation on a phone. I mean, I have to say, this is the only board in all the boards I've ever served on that you can't have conference calls and have a vote. I just don't. And validate who you are. So I don't know where it's all coming from. I haven't been on this board long enough, but it seems very outdated with where we are today, and we should figure out how we fix it.
I completely concur with that. As Cameron has advised us before, we will need a statutory change to do that, just given, I think, a gap in the legislation, but every other board I've served on is allowed voting through quorum, including telephonic quorum. I think we should look into that, and I think that is a very valid position. That said, I think we ought to encourage participation directly in potentially helping to facilitate people get to the meetings, other mechanisms, ride share, providing transportation, whatever. Those are important things for this process, and we cannot have people not.
I mean, I think it's important to hear Michael's summary of the meeting, but it's also important to hear what the votes were. Like, was there a vote taken on any of this, and what were the specific suggestions, and what were, if we have it. So it just, I mean, I sense the frustration about the lack of commitment, and I think we should work iteratively to try to fix that.
Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes counsel first.
Mr. Chair, very briefly, just to clarify, the physical quorum requirement, essentially, if you have a physical quorum present, you can also then have phone participation from members who are calling in because they're unable to be there for circumstances. So the point is, if you can get a physical quorum, then other members can participate via phone and actually hold votes. It's just the law is clear. There's not case law directly on it, but there's a lot of Attorney General opinions on the issue that state that for a board such as this, you need a physical quorum present.
There are other boards that are given the authority that, however, like citizens.
Specifically, I'm aware of, for instance, especially state boards or statewide agencies where essentially getting a physical quorum where you have a member in Pensacola and a member in Key West is physically impossible. So you have that there, but since Sunshine this isn't a U.S. constitutional issue, it's merely state statute. So if the legislature chose to, they could create an exception for it, and they have in some instances.
Mr. Starkey.
This is the issue I brought up on the phone on our policy committee meeting yesterday. And, this board is advisory, and I do believe that we should get with the times and technology and allow them to participate by phone or by a video conference. And but I have looked at the notes here, and Pasco County, I think our CAC member moved away, and I see the MPO seat is vacant. So I will get someone who commits to attending the meetings. But I know my alternate is very passionate about attending, but but he wants to be able to do it when he can't drive down here by phone. And I see we have Manatee. It's a long way to go for an advisory board meeting that may not take a whole lot of time.
And then to be told you can't even vote is just a little bit of a slap in the face. So I'd like to get a different opinion on that, if we might, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that every board operates that way. I know there are several in Pinellas County that do not, and we have much more participation.
Melanie.
One question. Since obviously the earliest we could get a legislative change likely would be next year, since we don't have anything right now in the session, does the CAC change its locations, like the TBARTA board decided? Could we do that? And if we're not, could we do that in the interim? I don't know if that would help at all, but to address some of these things about, you know, Manatee versus Pinellas.
Or Pasco.
Or Pasco, exactly, to actually address the region that may be helpful to getting a quorum. Is it always at the same place, Michael? Or?
For the past couple of years, it's always been at the same place. That's correct.
Something to consider
Yes.
if they might want to move their rotations as well, just like this board decided to do to encourage attendance. Because I do think we've seen an uptick when we were in Pinellas last month as well as here this month.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think there is a consensus building to try to do something here. And I would direct staff to look at all possible methods of doing this by changing the location of the CAC meetings, by changing the legislative statute. This is a simple fix, a remedial legislative fix. This is not a big thing that's going to have to be debated in committee here. And I don't see that it could not be done by the Transportation Committee in the Senate and put in a bill, although who knows what's going to actually pass in Tallahassee, if anything, this year. But that being said, this should not be a difficult issue given the geographic diversity and the disparate travel that has to be made here. So I will direct staff to look at all possible methods of doing this and report back to this board at the next meeting to facilitate getting people to meetings or allowing them to participate by phone, including looking into, the law again and potentially even asking the Attorney General for an opinion on the matter.
Mr. Chairman, might I suggest that we give this board the authority for you to craft a one-sentence, probably, piece of language that we could take to Tallahassee very quickly if we find that we do need something to happen in Tallahassee for that to happen, because I don't think that the legislature will be in session at our next meeting.
Okay, I think that's probably a good idea if Cameron can work on that and we can make the calls to the appropriate committee chair and so forth. Thank you. Okay, does that conclude? Any further questions for Michael? Melanie, you're recognized for the Policy Committee report.
Thank you for your comments.
Great. We had a good committee meeting on Wednesday. I believe we had 5 of our 6 appointed members attend either in person or by phone. We did not have a physical quorum present. We had 2 present and then 3 on the phone. So our consensus recommendations to you are going to be presented today, but they were not quote unquote formal votes. And we took up 2 agenda items, the first being the recommended job description of the executive director as we proceed in the search for a new TBARTA executive director. And you do have it was emailed out last night, like I said, following the Wednesday board meeting on Thursday. You have a hard copy before you as well. This also is the same job description, essentially, that came before the policy committee at its November, January, and February committee meetings, as well as the December and now February board meetings. So we've quote unquote seen this 3 to 5 times, depending upon whether you sit on the policy committee. And the changes that were recommended by the policy committee from when you last saw this at the December workshop as an entire board are as follows. On page, if we look at the first page together, the first time that you saw, I believe, Chief Executive Officer previously appear is in that first bolded paragraph. And staff pointed out very wisely that the enabling statute actually uses the word executive director as opposed to chief executive officer, that we'd want to match the language. So everywhere that CEO or CEO or Chief Executive Officer previously appeared in this job description was changed to reflect Executive Director. The second change that was made is under paragraph 2, under duties and responsibilities, still on the first page. And there, the sentence previously read, completing the Regional Transit Development Plan, RDDP, and subsequently implementing and operating the identified transit projects. And as you'll see, what we added now is to say may implement and operate. The idea being that we vibrantly discussed that at our December workshop, that we may or may not actually operate and implement regional transit projects. And so to contemplate that there may be some flexibility there, we added the word may, and then also added the word regional to clarify that our work is on regional transit projects, just not transit projects in general. With that, there were no other changes made. The quote-unquote consensus recommendation, Commissioner Kemp did raise a concern about the bolded paragraph. I'm sorry, actually it's the paragraph before the bolded paragraph, regarding whether we wanted to put regional transit projects in the job description. The majority of the committee members present discussed that yes, they felt that was important to give the potential executive director a flavor of what we're working on, not necessarily saying that these projects will or will not be part of what they actually work on eventually, but at least to give them a flavor for it. And so with that, the consensus was that the job description before you, to give one last caveat, be what the board passes as the proposed TBARTA executive director job description, with the understanding that if and when we decide to engage a recruiting firm, that then we'd get professional help further massaging this as necessary. So this is essentially saying, that as laymen, the board has now taken it as far as it can.
Okay, any questions for Melanie? Commissioner Kemp.
I'll just reflect on what I had expressed at the policy committee meeting, and that's the inclusion in this, which I thought was misleading and doesn't really help whoever may be looking at this job. It says, there are currently numerous transit projects which would be considered integral components of a regional transit system underway in Tampa Bay, including development of a regional transit plan and its resulting catalyst project. Then it's got semicolon. Then it's got the Central Avenue Bus Rapid Transit Project in St. Petersburg, Pinellas County. Then it's got the modernization of the historic Tico streetcar in Tampa, Hillsborough County. And then it's got the plans by the Florida Department, District 7, to include transit as a major component of the TBX next process. So I question why in the world we have the historic Tico streetcar in there, as well as the Central Avenue Bus Rapid Transit Project, which are transit systems operated now by, our HART system, at least in the case of the streetcar. Why would we be putting that in there? I was told it was because we support these projects, but then I was like, well, we don't support HART, and we don't support PSTA, and we don't support our other bus routes. I think this is not clarifying, and it is misleading and shouldn't be included in the description.
Other comments?
Yes, I'll comment.
Sharkey.
I think that any regional plan that we come up with is going to have to connect to other current and planned transit opportunities, whatever they may be, in the various counties. So I think that shows that we have started on something, and there are some exciting projects either coming or in place. So it's just informative to say we've stuck our toe in the water, but we aren't fully immersed yet. So we were okay with leaving that in.
I would make the further comment that we don't want to lose sight of the forest for the trees here. Our goal is ultimately to potentially engage a search firm or describe the process for finding a new executive director. And I think all of these things are potentially valid information for an applicant seeking to do that. We're not legally bound by this scope of this work or anything. And again, I don't, in all deference to Commissioner Kemp, I don't want to prejudice someone to say these projects are endorsed, and maybe there should be a disclaimer in there that no specific project has been chosen or endorsed, but this is a flair for what is being talked about by this regional board. But I think our focus should be on moving this process forward and not getting bogged down in the language or legalese of what the job offering states, especially if we're going to hire a professional recruiter to go out and look for a candidate here, because they will help refine that messaging as well. You know, we're
I would
looking.
move approval as submitted.
Second.
Been a motion second. Any further discussion?
Mr. Seal had her hand up a second ago, so.
Oh, I was just mulling over the language. I was just thinking there are currently numerous transit projects coordinated with partnering agencies or something to that effect, so then it reflects that there's others that are working on this and that we're working on it all together. So maybe that helps Commissioner Kemp in clarifying that it's not being conducted by us, but it's being conducted with other partnering agencies.
Yeah, with that.
Is that a friendly amendment, Commissioner?
Friendly amendment.
I would welcome that.
Yep, that's, yeah.
Can you state your exact language so we can just write it down though?
There are currently, the third paragraph, there are currently numerous transit projects in conjunction with partnering agencies.
Second.
There's been a friendly amendment, a second. Any further discussion? Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. And I won't, I appreciate that amendment. I think it helps somewhat, because I just think for anybody applying, this doesn't really describe the job. But anyway, the other thing I do like that we changed, may implement and operate the identified regional transit projects from what was to implement and operate. I think that's important. I'll just go on record now saying I can't imagine that we would start a new transit agency with all that's involved in a new transit agency to basically manage a single bus route, which is what we're talking about, and not just have PSTA run a bus from downtown St. Petersburg to Gateway to the airport. And HART is already starting to do this, is run a bus from Wesley Chapel Express Bus through the USF, which makes a lot of sense to run it through there. They call it the I-275 Express, but they're not running on I-275 because we know we won't get ridership there. So we're running it through USF down Bruce B. Downs, which is had a set-aside busway, over to 275, down to the airport, down to downtown, and then to the airport with limited stops. And this is the way I think a highway should be used. But at any rate, I just want to say that now that you know, I think it would be duplicative and wasteful, but I think the May handles that, so I'm fine with that. I just thought it would be important to say that at this time.
Any other points of discussion? All right, there's been a motion, a second, and discussion on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Amendment passes. The original motion as amended then, is there a motion for the amended motion?
I think we had one.
We did that.
Is there a second?
We included it.
Yeah. Okay, it's friendly, okay.
It was friendly.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Amendment passes. All right, Melanie, just as a recap then, are you moving the process forward in terms of making a substantive recommendation as to potential hiring recruiters next time, or what is the next step here?
Thank you. That was the second part of our two-part committee meeting, is that then what we discussed is that, and the board had some questions for us this past time about the procurement process, both applicable to TBARTA as well as used by PSTA, one of our sister agencies, because although PSTA has not looked for a new executive director or CEO, whatever their language uses, in quite some time, they do keep a search firm or search firms, quote unquote, up to date, so that if and when they do need to make a higher level replacement, they're ready to go. And so what the policy committee discussed was that the PSTA just recently approved in December 7 entities, that those appear to be the 7 entities that would be the universe of recruiting firms that could also be helpful to TBARTA in the transit world in terms of recruiting top talent. And so the recommendation or the consensus of the policy committee is to recommend that today the board consider giving the policy committee direction to consider those 7 entities during March before our next board meeting to narrow it down from 7 to 1. So it would kind of be a, I guess, two-part motion. A, that there's agreement by the board that that is our universe that we're looking at of entities, and two, that it's the policy committee that would have the direction to consider those 7 proposals. Oh, and that is important to note, is that, and Cameron has been very helpful, our legal counsel, in terms of getting both the public records from PSTA that regard the RFP, the proposals that were submitted themselves, as well as the contracts that were ultimately solidified and voted on, as well as HART when it thought it was going to get a new executive director, and it selected one of the PSTA entities when it thought it would piggyback to get its records as well about how they made that selection process, so that the policy committee has those.
Mr. Chair?
Chair recognizes Commissioner
In
Long.
response to Melanie's great summary of our policy committee meeting, my homework assignment when I left there was to bring to Melanie and our attorney the details of the PSTA vendor list. And Krauthammer was the agency that was used to hire the former executive director for HART, and the same entity that recruited Brad Miller for PSTA. And so I have the CD disc, which I think Doyle is in the process of forwarding over. So they are rated #1 in the transit industry. And we found them through APTA, which is the National American Transportation Association.
And one follow-up question, since we're in the sunshine, I know you were hoping to get additional records for Mr. Miller regarding all 7 agencies. Were you able to get those, or is that something we should have council continue?
No, I believe they're on the CD.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. And so staff can disseminate them to the whole. So we'll see what's there.
I had seen the committee report. I remember Krauthammer. I know them by reputation. They were very expensive, and there were some other. I mean, I personally would like to see maybe a recommendation of 2, so the board could go through them and vet them if that's
Mr.
the
Chair,
pleasure of the.
I forgot. To the point about the expense, I spoke to an entity yesterday that was very amenable to helping us fund the search. FYI.
Can we have
public knowledge, what entity, or no?
Well, I'd rather give the information to the chair and let him go forward to speak with the director of the agency and work it out, or Ray, because until they work it out, it wouldn't be public.
Okay, council, what is your comment on that?
I'm going to have to look into, I honestly would want to see, I would want to know more about what the funding source is, and a little bit more information as to what the expectations are for the funding. This is the first I've heard of it, so I hadn't had a chance to look at that yet.
Okay, well, it's something to certainly consider and look at worthwhile. Would the consensus of the board be that we could potentially look at 2 agencies and come back and then make a decision? I think that if we limit it to 1, that they rule out some folks. That being said, I'll entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Motion second. Any further discussion? All in favor by signifying by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks.
I had
Karen.
meant to bring this up on the executive director job description on Exhibit A in the first paragraph. This was the leadership competencies that we had for our county attorney search. So in the 4th line, you need to delete the county attorney oversight committee. Or change that language. I'll leave it up to you all to do that, but I just wanted to make sure.
Good call. Good.
I think that's good, and I believe I addressed the inaugural meeting of that committee, so that's near and
Mr.
dear
Chair,
to
we
my
got
heart.
this in PDF, but we can certainly work with staff that is more capable than I am to make that change. And the only other thing I want to say on the record, because I don't know that it was clear in my comments, is that when legal counsel did the analysis of the procurement process, not only did we get information regarding the PST entities, there was also determination made that yes, because the description and the purview of this process is similar, that we can actually piggyback if this agency so chooses to do on those 7 entities since they were recently approved. And that concludes our report.
Thank you. Any further questions for Melanie? Thank you very much for that, and thanks for moving this process forward. Next, we're going to have the Finance Committee. I'll make a couple of introductory remarks, and I'm going to have Ray give you an overview. But there's been an ongoing issue with TBARTA's grant administration because there's a lag in the time that we have to pay vendors and when we can invoice the grants. And this has been a recurring issue over the many years here, but it's coming to a head now because a large grant that's not about $600,000 left with Forward Pinellas is in jeopardy of being lost due to a federal audit because it has not been drawn down. So this is something the board has to consider, look at best practices, where we've gone before, what we've done. So that said, I think that we need to really have a report on this by an auditor and what we can do and what we can do constructively moving forward. But I'd like Ray to give a little bit of more substantive background on what has happened, and then maybe have a recommendation of how we can handle this and look at the best practices and solving the problem.
Okay, I'll try to make this as brief as possible. It's a grant that we got back in 2012 for about $1 million. It started out as a grant kind of centered on the VA, but then it was expanded to include other riders. One program is called One Click, One Call, which we work on with the Crisis Center for the Tampa Bay area, where people can get information on any kind of transportation available in any county in the region by calling that number. There is now about $500,000 left. There's 3 grants. One part of it has $25,000, one part has $12,000. I do not think that's going to be a problem for us to spend that down by the end of our fiscal year. The other has $580-some thousand in it. $267,000 is committed to HART for the regional fare card. So we've already committed to give them that money. We have to do it incrementally. We don't have that kind of money ahead of time, so probably in $30,000 payments, and they get reimbursed and then move forward again. So that is going to be difficult to spend that by the end of the year. That leaves about $250,000 left in there that could be used for something else, perhaps with PSTA, some type of capital project. The grant's very specific about the type of things you can do with it. The regional fare card worked because it benefited, everybody in the region and transit users and things of that nature. So I agree with what Jim said. We're having our audit done, and what I'm going to ask them to do is to see if they can put kind of another audit, add that to that at a reasonable cost where they can look at how we're doing this and what their recommendation might be. One of the problems is that our original grant designated recipient is Forward Pinellas, the Pinellas MPO. They were the only one in 2012 that could do that, so they're our sponsor. And once they're your sponsor, until you spend all the money in that grant, it can't go away. So I want also to meet with Whit Blanton of that organization and kind of get into the weeds and discuss what we can do and then how we can maybe figure out something to do with the rest of that money. So that's how I would like to proceed to solve this problem.
And in a meeting with Blanton and myself, there was, some of these, they were concerned that this grant had not been invoiced over a long period of time. And again, a lot of that is a function of cash flow. But I think as a board going forward, we need to really look at the entire totality of facts involved here, not just have an audit, but really a forensic audit as when this should have been billed, how it should have been done properly. And this is good for our own self-analysis. It's also good if we're going to go out and potentially in the private sector and get a loan that could do the gap financing or forward financing for this board. So my recommendation is to see and come clean and look transparent as to what could have been done better, where we have potentially not done what we could have with some of these grant administrations, but going forward, the best way to do that. And I will add on to that, thanks so much to Secretary Gwynn for helping us with the enterprise, grants. The DOT has forward financed that and has worked with us in doing that and has got that managed very well. And this is the exact type of thing that we need to do with our other grants because we are a grant-driven agency at this point. And going forward and making an ask to the Florida legislature, they're going to ask those hard questions with continuing revenue. How are you managing your grants? How are you managing your money? So I think at this point we need to say, let's step back, let's get an independent forensic audit of how we have done this rightly or wrongly and what we can best do in the future to correct that problem. So that would be my recommendation. Commissioner Long, first.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to hear that you're making a move to get this taken care of. I am concerned about the timing, because we're now in that cycle where the federal government is doing their every 3-year audit. And when they see that we haven't spent this money, they're going to take that money back. And so, to your point, I would certainly like to have a sense of urgency wrapped around that, because my understanding is they'll be coming in July, and we're going to be stuck if we can't figure this out between now and then.
Or we're hopeful we can work with the Forward Pinellas and getting an extension from them, even though the audit's there. But as I understand, that might be a technical legal issue now. So.
Yes, because of of that 3-year cycle. And while I'm sensitive to being understaffed and overworked and all of that kind of thing, the one thing you don't take your eye off is getting your money. And so we've got to really be, dogged about getting on top
Could not agree more. Kathleen, I think you had a...
Yeah, I was just going to say, is it a cash flow issue and or a resource issue, which I think it's both. And I think that we need to get resources from wherever you can get them and get some help. I mean, it's not necessarily full-time resources. I think as a member of HART, we can't lose money that's been ascribed because of a cash flow or a resource issue from a regional, a commitment. And I don't know if the money can be, I don't know. I mean, you're on it, and I appreciate the forensic audit focus. I also think that the agency should really focus on what resources are needed and get part-time help or, expert help and get it in there and get this cleared up.
We've already got the job description written for that, and we're going to move forward with that. And also, our new relationship with FDOT on how the billing is done is going to help us be able to focus on these grants more, because before we were kind of caught up in the van pool program, but now they have a way of paying them directly, so we're not having to come up with the money ahead of time. So that's going to help us focus on this, which we will do. I agree, we need to figure this out quickly.
Other comments, questions, or concerns about this grant process?
I'd like to piggyback on Commissioner Shanahan's comments about, couldn't we work with one of our partner agencies? They work with grants all the time, and surely they have staff that can help us get on top of this, that are competent and know what they're doing.
Yes, that's what I want to do with Forward Pinellas, is work with WIT and figure out, this is the situation, okay, how can we solve it?
You mentioned a job description, and I was just hoping that we could avoid having to hire someone at this point.
Well, if they're willing to lend us a worker.
Well, they might be. You don't know if you don't ask.
Question I have, when is the actual audit that you referenced coming up?
Sue?
We will be going through our audit starting in March, and it will come to the board for final approval at the June 2nd meeting.
Could we, it is possible to ask the auditors to include a more in-depth forensic audit of the...
I've actually already talked to them about it and said that we were interested in them making a proposal of how much that would cost. So I'm going to tell them, speed it up now.
Michael, with your financial background, any recommendations on this?
I recommend that this body seeks an alternative to what was just proposed, a more accelerated timeline in particular, that it's, 4 months between when the audit starts and when we're presented with the results, which we'd be in a corner and be behind in the process. So
especially if we were at risk for losing a grant like that.
Correct.
I think the best, and I want the board to chime in on this, the best thing is to, with all haste, try to get this done.
I don't think we don't need to wait for the audit to talk to WIT and see.
No, but I'm talking about the audit and talking to WIT as well.
Right.
And our auditors could be employed to start this work immediately, or it could be sourced otherwise.
Sue, what are the rules on that, or how is that annual audit done? I know we've been, okay.
We can figure out if we can accelerate the process.
And is the process incumbent on an actual audit to sort of sort through identifying what the grants are, the attendant timelines to them, and then how we sort out?
All that is in there, but I don't think the audit has included in the past how you would do things better or something. It's just a report on, okay, this is the situation. Kind of, it's required by the federal government that we have that kind of audit.
Well, that audit is, what I'm asking for, a forensic audit is more in depth than what we're asking for. Because it goes to best practices and procedures and what we've done and what we haven't done.
And They actually suggested that in the last audit, because they know the cash flow problems we have and all the issues, obviously, they're the auditor. You know, maybe we could figure out a way to make it work better.
Someone have other comments there? All right, that being said, I will make the chair will make a motion that we proceed, you know, that we direct staff to investigate as expeditiously as possible a forensic audit of all TBARTA grants, you know, and report back as soon as practical. Is there a second to that
Second.
motion? Second, any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Bray, any other comments on finance in Betsy's absence? Okay, that will conclude committee reports. The next item, the chair recognizes Jeffrey Stewart from Hart on the BRT study.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Board. I'm Jeff Seward. I am the Interim Chief Executive Officer of HART, as well as the Chairman of the TBARTA Transit Management Committee. This morning, I'm going to talk to you about a local project. However, it was really great to hear comments from the public this morning, as well as many comments that this board made concerning the importance of some specific key elements in studies of this nature. Although this is not a presentation on the Regional Transportation Feasibility Plan, it is, and I would argue, an integral part of the overall regional schematic of what is required to have a successful regional plan. Not unlike the work that's going on in Pinellas County right now with the Central Avenue BRT. No regional plan, irrespective of the mode or means, will be successful without the interconnectivity within the individual jurisdictions. So what I want to talk to you about today, and I'll move quickly, is something that we are moving forward with HART and our partners at FDOT on looking at creating some of that interjurisdictional spine that can connect to whatever project is decided in the future. So something that we're starting is a corridor and scope study, although it is just not another study, and I'll get to exactly what the expectations are for our deliverables towards the end. About 4 years ago, HART initiated the Metro Rapid North-South from the Hidden River area all the way down to MTC in downtown Tampa. Something that we did not do during that process was really treat it and develop it as a true BRT. There are no dedicated lanes. It was an overlay of current routes. So we are looking at amending that. Along with that, we are going to add the Florida Avenue between downtown Tampa and the Fowler Avenue corridor. So Fowler Avenue between USF and I-275 as well, to be looked at as BRT-like. And I'm going to talk about what BRT-like is and is not as I go through this presentation. So this is one of the major corridors, not routes, but corridors that HART services in Hillsborough County. It has a connection to over a dozen routes, either at UATC or MTC downtown, along other connections throughout the corridor. It is a continued FDOT partnership. One of the best elements of this, in my former CFO opinion, is we are leveraging prior monetary investment, primarily made by the Board of County Commissioners with the infrastructure surtax that was provided to HART during the development of the Metro Rapid. We are able to leverage the work that's already been done to expand this corridor. The two final bullets I'm going to talk about specifically by themselves. One, I mentioned it supports the local level connectivity to the RTFP proposals. Again, irrespective of which project is selected or desired, it does provide that interconnectivity. And then it discusses, and we're going to explore in great detail with this study, the impacts of the economic development along these routes with transit-oriented development, property valuations, and so forth. So first I want to talk a little bit about the TOD importance. A couple of the members of the public spoke on this morning. Something that will be very important in this study and all future studies that HART will undertake along with our partners is the knowledge that the federal well of funding is not expanding, it's constricting. And as such, the requirements for the request of future funding will come with more requirements. Now, although the new infrastructure plan that the President put forth, it's not guaranteed that it will move forward. There's not additional funding with it. But there are some key elements of verbiage that caught our attention. Now, although this is specific to subways and rail expansion projects, there is a scuttlebutt along our connections on the Hill that the FTA will be looking very strongly at putting this requirement in the future for even rubber-wheeled components of BRTs, particularly in the New Starts program. And one of those is the mandate of value capture. And right now, again, in the infrastructure plan, it is for light rail and subway. We are interested in the fact that the community is discussing transit-oriented development and the impact that these projects have on the valuation of property along these routes, the ability for businesses to expand and to grow along these corridors as we invest taxpayer dollars in them. The American Public Transportation Association defines value capture as instruments that allow jurisdictions to collect revenue in specific areas and direct that revenue towards specific improvements such as TIFs, impact fees, and so on. We're not advocating that. What we're saying is that it is going to be a component in future New Starts and federal application processes, most likely, and we want to ensure that this study addresses it. And when we come back to the public to discuss the ramifications of this study, we can show the economic impact of this corridor. So again, the emphasis will be on projects with strong public-private partnerships as well. And I want to talk about that in just a second. So this map, and it's a little hard to see, we have put the current BRT or the current RTFP projects that are being discussed, the CSX as well as the BRT. We've put it on this map in relation to what this corridor study will be looking at. Along with the Route 275LX, Commissioner Kempen mentioned that earlier, that's something that HART is moving forward with implementation now from the Wesley Chapel area all the way into downtown Tampa, and from downtown Tampa to the airport, moving 60-minute frequencies to 30-minute frequencies from the downtown corridor to the airport. Along with the RTFP CSX proposal and along with the RTFF 275 rubber-wheeled BRT. So along these corridors, we will also be implementing our hyperlink connections for first mile, last mile. So you essentially have those two routes coming down potentially for the RTFP into the Tampa corridors. We will have this BRT in place for that interconnection that will eventually be able to spread out all through Hillsborough County, as well as the interconnections of local transit between PSTA, or between Pinellas, and between Pasco counties that are already in existence. As well, we are moving people from, potentially, from those regional connections along this BRT into the downtown core, where there will be connections to the streetcar, potentially autonomous vehicles, which, by the way, we are showcasing next Tuesday at the Marion Transitway. You all will get a press release here within the next hour. As well as the potential for future autonomous vehicle transportation along these BRT corridors, particularly along the Fowler Avenue corridor. So, again, one of the key elements, and jumping to the RTFP discussion, one of the selection criteria that will be looked at, again, irrespective of project selection, is going to be what is the interconnectivity in the local jurisdictions look like. If you build this, are there the connections necessary within the jurisdictions to have people get on, get off, and be able to go along their local routes? This will help with that discussion. The scope of services. Design and engineering is included in this study. We are looking to go 70 to 90% of design. So we are not looking at just another corridor study. This is a tangible result that will result in a federal FTA small starts application at the end of this. It's going to leverage existing infrastructure, and we have had some discussions on the fact that the local match may be able to use, again, the match that's already been provided to HART for the development of the Metro Rapid BRT corridor. So again, as the project moves forward, we're looking at the corridor recommendations itself, exactly what sort of BRT applicable traits can be in each of these segments, design and engineering. So where are we? The HART board in February approved this project to move forward. This month, well, March, we will release a scope after FDOT and HART have finalized it and approved it. We'll release it. In April, we'll be taking the JPA to the HART board for approval of the formal cooperative stance with FDOT. We're looking at having a pre-bid meeting potentially. May, proposed evaluation. June, contract approval by the HART board to move forward. And then 2019/2020, the design completed, FTA small starts application initiated and starting to proceed. So the importance of this effort, and again, obviously it is a local HART and FDOT District 7 project, but the importance of having these dynamic interconnections within each of the jurisdictions, such as the BRT in Pinellas, such as this BRT in Hillsborough County, will be instrumental in moving any project forward on a regional level. And we're happy to be part of it, to be supportive to the regional aspect, and we're ready to move forward. Thank you for your time.
Questions for Jeffrey? Mr. Kemp?
I don't have questions as much as comments. I think this is an excellent project, as is the Central Avenue BRT in St. Petersburg. This is exactly this and kind of the express bus that we have that's going to go through Brisby Downs in the university area and then over and actually use the expressway in the way it was intended to be used, with few stops and through the region. But this is an excellent project because this is one that will bring us transit-oriented development, that will bring investment, and that will do the return on investment and the economic development that should be part and parcel of transit as well as moving people. The fact that, and I will say it over and over again, in what I think is a very disingenuous, and I say study in quotes, was done and presented to our board with few questions at all for $500 million in our future. But that study did not include anything about transit-oriented development, economic development, return on investment. It mentioned return on investment. I've seen studies from across the country, and they have return on investment, and it's a chapter. It's a whole series of things. It talks about transit-oriented development and how you reap benefits from making transit available, how people have access to things, and how it invites development in those communities. In our study, I really was stunned to find out. I was like, well, where is the part on return on investment? And I was pointed to a box on a graph, and in our study, it's fare box recovery, nothing more. It's kind of stunning that we don't have, that we haven't done the study to be the regional transit plan, that we didn't have these elements in it at all. I certainly want to, at very least, we should be doing this, but I think we would discover that when you put an Express Bus Plus up on a elevated expressway, you will find that you have zero economic development and investment. I will also say that the Sunrail project in Orlando, which the state of Florida has paid for in just 2 years, and this is according to an FDOT report, has $2 billion in investment that has been made around that track already. They are already bringing in $200 million more in tax revenue from the economic development generated by that, which, if we ever did, this elevated expressway would not bring that to us. But projects like this can. So that's I just thank you for bringing it forward. I think it's a very good project.
Thank you,
I have a couple
Kathleen.
questions. Is this I have like 3 questions. First of all, the anecdotal scuttlebutt, however you refer to it as, is that APTA knowledge? Is that confirmed anywhere in DC about the rubber tire adjustments? So I just want to get on the record that that was scuttlebutt.
It is scuttlebutt through APTA representatives, through our lobbyists, and just murmurs and noise, but we are preparing nonetheless.
What is the difference between what HART is working on and a gold standard BRT system?
So this BRT,
is this the BERT that everybody keeps talking about with cynical chuckles? This BRT?
With what type of structures?
Chuckles. This morning, people were calling this BERT. I'm assuming this is what they're referring to.
I am not sure what they were referring to, but this would be, the difference would be, this is a hybrid BRT. There would be dedicated lanes, there would be queue jumps, there would be signal level prioritization, and there would be, based on the study, specifically where station placement would be based on economic development, based on possible transit-oriented development, based on current and potential land use changes along that corridor. So as far as the depth of the study is concerned, it is localized. It is dealing with a specific existing corridor where the RTFP, as far as the BRT, the 275, it does mirror a little our 275LX, but we are going to have many, many more stops, and we will not be using a dedicated lane or a shoulder for that service. So I do believe that the differences are this: the first is it is serving a local constituency. We are looking at, like the 275 BRT solution, a future use of potential autonomous vehicles along some of the corridor, not all of the corridor. The ability to interconnect and grow future local routes, that's a commonality between the two. I think the real difference, one is we have existing service in those corridors right now, so we can gauge some of that future potential ridership. I don't look at them as real comparatives. They do serve 2 singular uses. One is the interconnectivity between our 2 counties and connectivity through the region. Our BRT is allowing accessibility for current riders, future riders, choice riders, folks that aren't riding yet, that interconnectivity to that future regional connection. So we wouldn't be running that BRT-like buses along this BRT corridor. The type of vehicle could be a combination of our current BRT CNG buses to shuttles to future autonomous vehicles, even possibly some dedicated ride share along those corridors. But we haven't got far enough into the discussion yet of exactly what type of vehicle. But the other difference is that this BRT potentially has that local match. It has the ability to leverage the current infrastructure changes that have been made. But again, you could look at it being similar to the 275 LX or 275 BRT as well, where that work, if it is the 275 rubber-tired BRT, we would be leveraging the infrastructure that FDOT is starting to work on, and we would leverage that future development along those corridors to be able to utilize the BRT. So where they are a lot different, there are some similarities, particularly on the reliance on current and future infrastructure changes along those corridors. So one reason why the cost of even this BRT with a local match would be lower than it would be if we were just going into it carte blanche, we're leveraging current infrastructure. the 275LX RTFP solution would be leveraging future infrastructure that FDOT is putting into place, thereby decreasing the total cost of the project overall. And that was a very long answer to your question.
So if I was a simple thinking member of the public, which I consider myself to be, I view this as a duplicative effort that's going to run on parallel paths versus 275, parallel routes. So would this not then be a feeder to, if the phase one, which I always say when people talk about this program, like it's the only opportunity of any transit in the area, phase one was proposed, would this BERT system not be a feeder to that system and we wouldn't do the 275? And why would we have two systems? Why would we have the parallel paths and then the 275? I mean, that seems like one's trying to chase the other to prove some point and not necessarily going about this from a regional advantage perspective. And so we're back to competing amongst ourselves, cannibalizing dollars, and, you know, from my perspective, once again, embarrassing ourselves as a region. And that's, again, just listening to your presentation today and some of the innuendos that I don't think are factual, and I really don't like presentations with scuttlebutt commentary. But I also think that we need to be very clear here in terms of what are the segmentations of not only responsibility, but what's the goal, you know? So if this could be a piece of the recommended, if that even passes, gold standard, the thing you keep referring to is the RTFP, which acronyms are not good when you're talking to the public either because they don't know what it is, but that's the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan that has phase one as an option. I just, you know, what would you say to that? Is that a mischaracterization of the proposed study that HART's going to go forward with?
With respect, I would say it's a mischaracterization.
So it's not duplicative?
I don't believe so, no. I believe that they're supportive of one another. And something that we have discussed prior to this particular BRT is, along with the regional conversation, which is very, very important to be having, we have a need of local riders and local taxpayers that have to be served. And we can't sit in stasis while this discussion occurs and funding is found and a project is developed. We have to be supportive of the project and we have to be supportive of the process, but at the same time, we have a base of taxpayers that are asking for expanded service, are asking for more modified, more nimble service, more modern service. So I believe that they can occur on parallel tracks. As a chartered agency, I believe that we have a strong commitment to serve that base while engaging in the larger regional conversation. We have corridors now, just after we did Mission Max, we cut almost 20% of our service. We have to start looking at different ways to provide service. And they're asking, they being the taxpayers and our riders, are asking to have quicker, faster service within our county without building new roads. And these are the types of projects that I feel strongly will answer those types of questions and needs for those riders. I believe that both of these projects can exist together in the same funding universe. We have had discussions in the past where there is concern that we have 4 New Starts applications in this region at one time. We are competing against one another.
And we have decreasing ridership. I mean, I'm for BRT, so don't misinterpret. But my only point is that you're up here presenting a study that's going to get done, that's going to be a key part of the overlay of what the proposed regional transportation transit plan outlined as a key part of their 41-mile route, not all of their routes. So again, government at its best. I guess that's all I can say.
Well, thank you. The chair will add a couple of comments there that we can't forget that our purpose and scope as defined by the legislature is to be a regional transit authority. You have local needs, as does Pinellas County, as do all the member counties, and those are substantively different. LOD is more a function of a local government than it is a regional transit authority. It is just by definition and scope is generally recognized. So I think going forward, we as a body have to realize that we're not sitting here today to discuss only Tampa, Hillsborough projects. We're here to discuss the whole region and the constituency that we're made up of. So I would encourage everyone to make that distinction as we go forward. Secretary Gwynn.
Just a couple of comments, because I want to try to build on what Jeff's talking about, because there are a lot of studies either going on right now or that will be commencing in the near future. We've got this study, which is, if you look at our regional transit feasibility plan, this is a step beyond that. We have $5 million in our work program next year to fund a similar study that will be recommended to us by TBARTA, which could be this catalyst project along the interstate, which could be something else. Whatever it is brought to us by TBARTA, we'll fund in the next stage. Should the 41-mile corridor be recommended, it absolutely would be done in conjunction with this study, because we wouldn't anticipate having stations along the BRT and along the interstate. They would be coordinated. And some of the buses will only stop a few places. All that's programmable by the operator. The local route would probably have the more of the stops along there. But these two studies would not be two independent working out of sync. These would work closely together. And that's one of the reasons why the timing is sort of critical. DOT is funding all these studies, but we've tried to take a position that we are waiting to hear back from our partners. We're not the operating agency. Right. We're not the ones who are going to make the decision for transit in the region or at the local level. We'll be a funding partner and we'll be a facilitator. As we go forward, one of the things we had hoped to do in this regional premium transit study, which you remember, if you go back to why this study was initiated to begin with, it was to try to identify projects that could secure federal funding. Because I think at the time it was determined that there wasn't enough local funding to do it without the federal funding. And so that's been the focus of the Jacobs study. So we have to go back and look. That was what they're doing. That's what they're doing. Now we're bringing that out to the public. The thought was, let's take this out to the public and get their input. And at the time, we had contracted with HART through a JPA to lead that process with Jacobs. I would like to request perhaps that we ask HART board to reconsider their decision to not allow their staff to participate in the public involvement. We're not asking them to promote any single project. We just wanted them to be our partner that would go out to help the consultant collect the information. For the consultant to go out without a single agency out there with them, I think is gonna be a problem. Perhaps, I look at this project and my only issue or concern would be, hopefully the HART board would not tell them a similar direction on that study. We are relying on our partners to take these projects forward. So I'll bring that to you to answer the question about the two studies being competing. They could absolutely marry together, but we don't know whether that's what you're going to recommend to us to go forward with. So we don't want to leave that as won't go waiting on this study. We'll marry them together if they do, I'm sure. But yeah.
Mr. Chair,
I think Commissioner Kemp had a hand up afterwards.
Okay.
And then
I didn't see her. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, and I've heard what has been said. I would like to point out that locally, these two streets, Nebraska Avenue and Florida Avenue, are our number 1 and 2 bus routes with our greatest number of transit riders, and is in this area going from USF to downtown is the most transit-rich area in the entire region, bar none. It's very important that we start to do better transit and serve at at these levels, at street level, these needs. That's where people walk out and catch the bus, as I did this morning on Florida Avenue. Walked from my house, had to cross a street where there was packed with traffic and there was no crosswalk. And I had my red dress on and my phone, and I waved to the cars as I walked in front of them, stopped in traffic to get through, to get over to the bus stop to the other side. We need to make changes like that to facilitate what goes on at these streets. I can tell you that I won't be crossing the on-ramp in my neighborhood that I drive by all the time as cars pack down and trucks and everything else anxious to get onto Hillsborough Avenue to catch a bus. I would not be doing that. But I'd like to say that these are important projects. This is what we need to connect up our region. It makes sense at the street grade level. It makes sense as an investment. And I just see this, the elevated expressway, again, I'll say, use an expressway the way an expressway was intended to be used, which is few stops, go to the stations we already have. Don't be spending $400 million in something that we can handle with $2 million and some express buses. Put up there, and we could do it tomorrow. And, you know, what will be built in the future will be built. We can just use that infrastructure. But we will not have the ridership above at the expressway to serve the numbers that we have, and these are very important projects at street grade that will make a difference in our transit ridership and our service in this community.
Mr. Chair, I had a question for you, Secretary Gwen. What was the angst with the Hearts boards having their staff participate in the public engagement? That's what we usually want our staff to do.
I don't know, Jeff, I think we talked briefly about it, and I think it was just, I talked to a couple of board members, and I really wasn't clear exactly what it was, to be honest with you. I just think they didn't want them going out with the consultant.
Jeff, do you have a response?
I can address. So currently what I'm working on is addressing all of the concerns that the individuals of our HART board that voted no to having staff assist in the public outreach, addressing each of their concerns. A lot of those concerns are a lot of what you heard today, particularly about the lack of TOD, a lack of economic development. And it's not so much a lack of the work being done, it's a lack of the work being explained and educated to the board. So we are going to get back with Jacobs with those concerns and comments, have those addressed, and then come back an agenda on the April 2nd board meeting to reconvene the conversation, hopefully have those issues addressed. And the understanding that, yes, going out to the public is, comment was made today about public comment, about the importance of hearing what the public has to say, irrespective if it's about the specific topic at hand or not. And I think it's elevating that conversation to that level, saying it is not HART staff going out and supporting CSX, or it's not HART staff going out and supporting the BRT or the actual solutions. It's supporting the public vetting process. And it's going out there as a subject matter experts in transit with the folks that did the study and have the conversation with the public, be able to get up and in an educated fashion address the technical merits of the projects in the study, not necessarily the projects or supporting or endorsing them themselves. There was a little bit of a misunderstanding of what was being asked, and I take responsibility for that, and I will take responsibility to go back and try to get it a little more clarified and help move this contract, which is HART's contract, forward, so we can have that dialogue with the community and have the community come back and say they like A or B, or don't like A or B and they'd like to see C. That has to happen, and we are going to move forward with that discussion.
Thank you.
And I will add to that, yeah, I was a little bit disheartened at the actions of your board, because they were the original recipient of the grant, and it was their grant, and we were in negotiations with you and others to have an MOU for this agency to be the, you know, the leader in that grant, and you came before this board and asked us to do just that. And this is not the ultimate vote. We are all in the process now to discuss, to analyze, to hear the public, to get input, and then to deliberatively make a decision. We have not made a decision yet. And it seemed to me kind of walking away from the table, and I was a little bit dismayed, frankly. But I hope that can be corrected, and I hope we act as a region again and vet these things in the sunshine, in the open, and vote on them here, you know, not by discussions outside of that forum. So that said, Commissioner Kemp?
Yes, at that meeting, there was more or less an endorsement call for this study, and I did object to that. And that was when it moved forward. We did not want people with heart acting promotionally with this. And I do have concerns about the process as it moves forward, that we have these processes that connect and link what I look as a promotional marketing type of event with a study. It seemed to me that the study, and I'll put it in quotes, was more a marketing effort from the start. We did have an express bus study that was done with millions of dollars in 2015. We had a rail study that was done with millions of dollars in 2012, I think by the same agency. And why we spent millions of dollars again and from the start did not even include the information that we had already had from those two prior studies, and was not put forward in a really a way for the public to gain knowledge from that, I think is a problem. So I'll
Well, perhaps that was an error in communication about the endorsement of the study, because I do not think that was noticed, or that was any of the intent of any of these discussions going on now, which are preliminarily vetting of a draft proposal without a full recommendation yet. We are collecting data, we are hearing from the public, we are doing what is our due process obligation to do. And no one has made a pre-decision about that.
I would still say that the study is not fully informational or accurate, and it's a problem. I met with Bob O'Malley at CSX, and I asked him, when were you contacted at all by Mr. Pringle? 2 years ago, when this study was first announced, Mr. O'Malley went and talked to Mr. Pringle right out of the meeting 2 years ago. He's never once been contacted in 2 years. I have no idea where those numbers came from, that he had included anything for CSX. In the 2012 study that Jacobs Engineering did, they included 12 miles. The study that we have right now, the study, has 9 miles. It went from downtown to the corner of Nebraska and Fowler. 9 miles. If it had gone over to USF 12 miles, as the 2012 study did, it would have included 46,000 more students, 25,000 more jobs. I mean, it would have blown all of anything else out of the water. So the fact that, and what I found out too that is available is the South Tampa track. And for those of you, since we have never had a presentation, I've been on this board for a year, we've never had a presentation on the potential of CSX at all. I will tell you that Sunrail in Orlando, which the FDOT paid for the right-of-way. There is between 4 counties an agreement. There is an Orlando operating agreement. At any rate, it could take 5 years to convert CSX rail throughout this region and to a commuter rail system that could be used. That's if we were to